She had the brightest topaz blue eyes I've ever seen. Her eyes were almost transparent, a perfect shade of pale blue, even in the dim light. They flared as she tried to escape my grip, pinned to the asphalt, her dark curly hair scattered around in a lush fan. I continued to hold her, but she was stronger than I thought. She didn't waste any energy on screaming, instead acting with skill and concentration. Her action surprised me with unexpected force. She sank her teeth into my hand. I managed to pull away. Her wrists slipped from my grip, and before I could react, she rushed forward again, her movements fast and precise. For a moment our eyes met, and in that short moment I saw a slight smile on her lips. At the same moment, she tried to bite me again, but I managed to react, freeing my right hand. She responded with a powerful knee strike that knocked me off balance. She seemed to be in great shape and knew how to use her body in a fight. After that, everything changed. Her agility and strength became apparent. She got out of my grip and stood up. Her movements were clear like an experienced fighter. I stood opposite, realizing that she was trained in martial arts, which explained her accurate and powerful blows. We were both tense, but I saw that she was limping, and that gave me an idea for the next step. The sharp sound of a siren broke the silence, causing us both to sit up straight. I lowered my hands, watching out of the corner of my eye as she did the same. We looked at each other. Holy, the lighting brightened as a grim, gray-tailed instructor approached us from the concrete blocks that surrounded the training area. I saw level 2 students looking at us with wide eyes from outside the fence. They were leaving the observation room. The training ground was asphalt and gravel, about the size of a basketball court. A row of cars stood along one side. "Agent," she turned to him without saying a word, still watching me out of the corner of her eye. "I know he's heavier than you, but when you throw him off, you have to keep moving, pressing your thigh against his inner thigh. The main purpose of this technique is to gain advantage and control from the top position. As you noted, even a strong blow to the groin does not always incapacitate if the opponent has a high-paying threshold. You should take the opportunity to escape when the enemy is so much bigger and stronger than you. Nevertheless, credit. Sergeant, I have turned towards him, still watching her closely. Good initial attack and rolling after the release was the right call, but you should have done the sweep straight away. It would save you from broken ribs, test, end of exercise, end of training. The indicator lights switched to green and the voltage instantly subsided. The instructor turned and walked away to the second. Level students, the men openly stared at my opponent in her underpants, while the women looked at me with a mixture of horror and disgust. The agent staggered when she tried to take a step, almost fell but managed to stay on her feet. I took off my sweat-soaked t-shirt and handed it to her. She nodded curtly and took it, tossing her ripped shirt and bra onto the ground before pulling on a t-shirt that looked like a mini dress on her. She did it more to stay warm than out of modesty. If she had any modesty left at all after the young Pathfinder outdoor survival alibis and lies legends and cover-ups and extended battery counter-interrogation courses. To the infirmary, I asked. She nodded, then wiped her split lip with the collar of her t-shirt. I can't walk at all. I don't think anything is broken, but my leg can't bear the weight. Cutting? She nodded again. Probably a bad bone bruise. It's good that this is my last day. I can carry you there if you keep your weight on my right side. I need to bandage my ribs myself. She nodded again. Politenesses like thank you and please were strictly forbidden here as part of keeping students from getting too close to each other. I knew she was a federal agent of some sort out of Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, FBI, or D Substance Enforcement Administration, perhaps because she was addressed as agent. Likewise, she knew that I was from military intelligence, since I was addressed as sergeant. Civilians from intelligence agencies, such as the CIA, were usually called officers. No names were used here at all. The level 2 students looked in shock and disbelief as she allowed me to gently lift her, and were even more surprised when she wrapped her arm around my neck. They didn't understand. They weren't field operatives. They were just being introduced to how we train here. Where was here? This was a little problematic. Suffice it to say that it was somewhere east of the Mississippi. Maybe. This place had no official name, only an ever-changing alphanumeric code. So in the tradition of spies and scouts, the place received several unofficial nicknames. St. Tristan's Academy for Lost Girls, and Bad Boys, Mistress Dominique's Emporium of Pain, but most often Antisocial Behavior 101 course. The curriculum included several classes covering topics not taught in a standard university program. Students were given a course of study depending on their mission. Here are a few that I practiced. Disorder hand-to-hand combat, general disorder, small group combat without weapons. I did not take this course as I act alone. Stealth counter-surveillance, devastation and chaos, defensive and offensive driving. Mr. Wizard, improvised weapons and explosives. Young Pathfinder outdoor, survival. Alibi and lies, legends and covers, extended beatings, counteraction interrogations, goat bones and chicken blood technical supervision. What we just completed was the final exercise of the No Means No course, a comprehensive sexual assault protection course for female operatives. Sexual assault is understandably one of the main fears of many women working undercover, and this course has been specifically designed to counter some of that. For the final scenario, the aggressors were male students who had completed the disorder course above standard. We were given very specific instructions and some training for this scenario to make it as scary and realistic as possible. We were paired with female students to increase fear based on their psychological profile. Sounds terrible. That's how it should be. No more than half a lot. Dozen female operatives participated in the training at a time, and they were simply called into the administration building straight from the restaurant, where they completed the exercise of covering up what could be more harmless than a waitress. The shortest route was through the supposedly empty and dark training ground. After 6 months of training, they were not completely unprotected. But they were never told that the course's final exercise, No Means No, even existed. Their only warning was a red exercise begin light with an accompanying siren, which also signaled the aggressor to attack. Even the garish yellow and red waitress uniform, with its short skirt and flimsy blouse, was designed to make them feel vulnerable and to let all the instructors know that the exercise had begun. This also ensured that aggressors would not accidentally attack Lost Level 2 students. We, the aggressors, were instructed to act very aggressively. We could fail the exercise just as easily as the female operatives. Everything except penetration was permitted, and even that was encouraged. For us, this was the last exercise of the final year. The male students left that evening, and the women the next day, all after a thorough interview. We didn't talk while I carried her down the corridor. That wasn't the way it was done here. The path was short. Someone had cleverly designed the building so that the infirmary was on the same floor as the hand-to-hand combat training room. People were injured here. Many. There were no mats on the training ground. The knives were dull but metal, and the pistols fired reduced charges of rubber bullets that hurt like hell. We didn't write birthday cards. Everything here was aimed at preparing for our work. The people we passed along the way simply ignored us. Strange clothing and injuries were common here. When we entered the infirmary, the nurse only said, "Room 3." And I carried her there and laid her down on the exam couch as carefully as possible, although she still winced in pain as her weight rested on the couch. Then I sat down on a chair nearby. Somewhere nearby, muffled sobs could be heard through the walls. She listened for a second, her blue eyes darting around the room. Quietly, someone failed. I nodded. I think so. There was a long pause. Finally, without looking up, she asked, "So what was with the excitement?" I really hoped she wouldn't mention it. In 6.5 months, the most significant physical interaction I had with a person was being drowned in extended battering. A beautiful girl with blue eyes practically naked underneath me. I'm only human. This is almost a romantic evening compared to what it was. I understand, but why only towards the end the girl could regard this as an insult? I laughed. I'm not attracted to sex without the woman's consent. It's not exciting. But when you smiled, probably thinking about how you were going to hit me, I knew you realized it was just a practice. She actually smiled at me. I calmed down when I grabbed your hand with my teeth. That's when I finally realized that this was another training scenario. And when I smiled, it was because I thought, if I stop resisting, maybe for the first time in 6 months, I will have sex. Hell, If I had waited another 30 seconds to dump you, I would have enjoyed it. I wonder how the instructors would react to this. They would probably criticize our technology." She giggled. "I can already imagine it. Agent, you need to put more force into your thrusts, and your angle is wrong." She covered her face with her hands, trying to suppress her laughter, but not quite successfully, which made me struggle with it too. Then she looked at me, her eyes full of tears from laughing. Can you imagine the second-level students? At that moment, we both started laughing and couldn't stop for a while. Before we could continue our conversation, a slightly concerned doctor came into the room and began to examine her, after which she was given a pair of crutches. I also had my ribs bandaged to stabilize them and reduce pain. As usual, we were not offered painkillers, only anti-inflammatory drugs. As we walked out into the corridor, heading in different directions, she looked into my eyes and smiled. I looked after her and thought about the heat I felt during the exercise, and about the touch of her body against my hand when I carried her to the infirmary. It wasn't until I got on the plane later that I realized she never returned my t-shirt. 2 years later, the department head Donna interrupted my well-deserved vacation and demanded that I come to the office immediately. So I headed there, unshaven, wearing sandals, shorts, and a Joe's Crab Shack t-shirt. As I walked past her secretary and entered the conference room, I saw a couple of formal suits, typical government employees sitting at her desk, looking at me expectantly. Purposely ignoring them, I turned to Donna. "What's wrong with Mulder and Scully? I hope this isn't a help to the FBI." She glanced quickly at the two agents who were clearly eyeing me with obvious disgust. Donna looked at me with slight irritation, but she should have known that this was inevitable. Finally, the female agent spoke. "What's your problem?" I lifted the hem of my t-shirt, showing the bullet wounds on my side. "Last time I worked with you, one of your agents went on a cowboy spree and 3 of us got shot, including himself. I picked up his weapon and completed the operation, and in return, your agency wanted to prosecute me for not following instructions. I wasn't allowed to have a gun, so apparently when he fell, I had to just lie there and wait for my death. And if he had waited another 30 minutes, as I said, local law enforcement would have helped arrest the criminals without any problems. But he didn't want to share the glory." She fell silent, looking at her partner. Then she turned to him. "I told you that report looked strange." Then she turned to me again. "I'm not going to go undercover. Executive assistant directors rarely do that, and for the record, I'm the one who covered up the intention to sue you. That report really made me suspicious. Look, we've brought in an agent who's just as nervous about working with untested military assets as you are about working with us. If you both give the stop signal, we will reconsider our options." I bit my tongue and nodded instead of answering. The executive assistant director of the FBI was a little higher on the food chain than those I got. Was willing to say, "Fuck off" to Donna, looked pleased. I'll have to discuss this with her later. A second later, the door behind me opened and the female voice spoke. "Ma'am, the technology looks great. If they just teach me the equipment, we won't need." When I turned around, the voice died away and she stood looking at me with wide eyes. I too was silent, lost in her impossible blue topaz eyes. She was the first to find her voice. "Sergeant, agent." I felt confusion wash over Donna and the 2 FBI agents. Things were just starting to get interesting. "I still have your t-shirt. How's your dignity?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Everything is fine. It's healed. How's your ass? Like new. You can keep the t-shirt." "I've never been to Rutgers." Her lips curved into a sly smile. "I plan to leave it. It's my favorite nightgown." Donna raised one eyebrow in confusion, looking at me with interest. "Your friend? Classmate at St. Tristan School." The agent gave me a sly smile. "We had a very short but very intense, very physical relationship. I couldn't walk for a month." The 2 men in suits looked even more confused, and the FBI agents clearly did not understand what was happening. The agent noticed this and decided that an explanation would be helpful. We were adversaries in a one-on-one combat training scenario during a specialized course for undercover officers a couple of years ago. The male agent still looked puzzled, but the assistant director nodded in understanding. "This course does have a reputation for being quite brutal." The dark-haired woman continued to explain the scenario. although her account was rather dry and distant compared to my vivid and intense memories. Donna looked a little worried. It may not work. I also trained there. I'm not sure how I would handle working with my ex-enemy, and almost 10 years have passed since. Then, the agent smiled. I'll be fine. Yes, it was scary at the time, but it was a training scenario, and he was just following his instructions. Donna looked impressed, then turned to me. Are you ready for this? I nodded, continuing to watch the agent out of the corner of my eye. If we work out the details so that everything looks logical, I'm ready to work with her. We have the same training, and she stays cool under pressure. Emma! Her name was Emma, and she was great. She put together the bulk of the operation plan, and it was far from the standard mess that federal law enforcement usually comes up with. Instead of surveillance vans disguised as repairmen or something like that, we were just going to rent a house and work in the area. Emma even got her LPN license and kept it current. This allowed the FBI to create false cover documents for her without the risk of her being unprepared. She was going to work part-time at a women's clinic on the outskirts of the area, while I worked as a substitute teacher in the local high schools. This gave us control over our schedule and plenty of time to observe the target. We could be hiding in plain sight. Emma and I created our cover. We were going to introduce ourselves as newlyweds who had spent 6 months apart because I was teaching abroad as part of a fellowship program. Our goal was in the Romanian Quarter, where the FBI received several anonymous tips that weapons were being transported there for co-cartels, and more importantly for me, for terrorist cells in the United States. This was important to me because the anti-terrorism laws allowed me to be transferred to the FBI as a technical linguist. Several tips led to this area, but no one named specific people. The request to the court must have been impressive because we practically had a free hand to conduct surveillance on the basis of important government interests. We had a variety of telephone interception equipment, parabolic microphones, and a variety of other devices, from cameras disguised as lipstick to listening devices disguised as various objects. We spent the next 4 hours enthusiastically working through the scope of the operation, practically ignoring Donna and her superiors until they left. Emma impressed me with her attention to detail. All that was left was to make some minor adjustments, which was fortunate since we only had 2 weeks left before we started. Since we were clearly new to the insular immigrant community, we decided to hide by making extra noise about ourselves. On Friday, the day before we moved, I walked through the neighborhood and left notes on doors, apologizing that our rental truck would block the street. When we arrived, our car still had remnants of the "Just Got Married" signs poorly erased from the soap on the windows. 6 men and women from our agencies helped us with the move. In fact, they were also the technicians installing the equipment in the attic and basement of our home. Emma came into the clinic that same day to begin her work. Everything went smoothly, as did the subsequent operation. 6 very bad men and 1 confused woman with a bad sense of judgment ended up in prison. As far as Emma and I were concerned, it was a 6-month period that could only be described as bliss. We instantly clicked. She was perfect, smart, beautiful, cheerful, and understanding. We didn't even try to deny our mutual attraction on the first night we ended up in the same bed. For the first month, I thought it was lost. Then I decided it must be mutual infatuation. By the 4th month, I was sure it was love. We shared stories about our childhood, about previous assignments. I told her about my 2 months in a Buddhist monastery where I hunted terrorists while trying to stay awake while meditating. She told me about going undercover as a gay female artist. She probably got too deep into this cover, as she and her partner slept with each other several times. This was nothing new for Emma, who had spent her high school years in a girls' boarding school, but it was new for her partner, and she ended up leaving the FBI, taking the bar exam, and now living with another woman downtown. I gave Emma flowers, and we had picnics and barbecues with neighbors. We even sometimes babysat the neighbors' children. I saw that Emma would be the perfect mother one day. Everything seemed so real, but it wasn't real. Emma was ambitious. She wanted to succeed on her own, and no one and nothing could stop her. Her parents were very rich, not as you probably think much richer, Emma was essentially raised in elite boarding schools in Switzerland, and her childhood was one big training course to turn her into the ruthless lawyer her parents wanted to protect their business empire. She hated it. I hated every minute of school, and I hated my legal career even though I was successful at it. And so after graduating, instead of going to work at one of her father's firms, she immediately applied to the FBI. She wanted to make her own way. Her parents were furious, threatened her, and eventually disinherited her. Ultimately, this ambition proved too strong. I was in love, and so was she, but she couldn't sacrifice her dream. There was too much at stake. Our careers, since it would mean giving up undercover work. And working undercover meant that we couldn't even continue to date on the side. We would have to break up completely. It was also dangerous. There was too much chance that one of us would be killed, or that our work would follow us home. She was adamant. This upset her as much as it upset me. Our last month was full of tender kisses, tears, and long nights spent in each other's arms. Every night she held on to me as if her last breath depended on me, but in the end she felt we needed to break up. The operation ended quietly. Good operations always end quietly. No loud shootouts, just a knock on the door, and a few quiet interrogations. That's it, and a broken heart. 6 years passed before I saw her again. I had just finished my daily report when the phone rang. She clearly expected me to recognize her voice. All she said was, "We need to meet at Walter Reed Hospital in the main lobby as soon as possible," and hung up. I quickly Googled how to get to the hospital and immediately went there, telling the receptionist that I had an emergency. When I transferred from military to civilian service, I took over Donna's position along with her secretary. Donna also moved up the career ladder. Now I worked under her leadership, but was already responsible for the operations myself. I found Emma in the center of the busy lobby, still standing upright, although her hair was now streaked with strands of iron gray. This color suited her. Her expensive, perfectly tailored suit loudly announced that this was a senior government official, even if she was not accompanied by a bodyguard standing a little behind, clearly trying to maintain control of her security zone. He tried not to be disturbed by a tall woman in a formal suit and a shorter woman in an overly bright dress and blouse. I saw his instincts sharpen as I walked straight towards Emma. I kept my hands in sight and nodded as I approached. "Deputy Director." She answered with a short, tense smile, slightly more polite than when we first met. "I can learn, albeit slowly." Then a shadow passed over her face and she said, Emma was injured by a car bomb in Turkey. A month ago, I felt my heart stop. She will survive. She is kept in a medically induced coma while doctors restore everything. She lost her right leg, part of her right arm, and will need plastic surgery on the right side of her face. She will survive, but to be honest, I couldn't hear what she said anymore. Maybe she kept talking, but I stopped listening. Her eyes were still bright, topaz blue, when I met them through her rainbow skirt and bun of dark curls tied up with a pink ribbon. I knew how the moth felt. I didn't think I just walked up to her and knelt down in front of Lake. I didn't care about the expensive suit. I wasn't sure my legs could hold me up. Someone said something, but neither I nor she heard it. Our gazes were frozen in surprise. I understood everything, and she does too. She spoke first. "Where have you been? Hunted for bad guys." But now, I'm done. They don't let me see my mother. That's because they don't know how strong you are. She reached out and took mine. The woman in the rainbow skirt stood in a daze with an expression of horror on her face. I got up. "Where is Emma's room?" The elevator ride to her room was a real ordeal. Her name was Ellie. She was 5 years old and loved gymnastics, horses, and mango smoothies. Everyone else wisely stopped talking. By the time we reached the top floor, we had already become inseparable. Even the woman in the rainbow skirt seemed to admit it. I picked Ellie up and immediately headed to Emma's room. The nurse tried to stop us, but the bodyguard motioned for her to understand that it was okay not to interfere. As we walked in, I felt Ellie tense and gasp quietly in my arms. Emma was really in bad shape, roaming 4 catheters, oxygen masks, and half a dozen machines emitting hissing and silent beeps surrounded her bed. I carefully placed Ellie on her mom's right side. Mom is sleeping, but I'm sure she could use a tight hug. Ellie smiled and settled comfortably next to Emma. I turned to the deputy director. Why now? She thought for a moment before answering. Katie and Monica's guardianship rights expire in a week, and Emma's parents are trying to take her away. Emma would hate that. And with that kind of capital, only the biological father could definitely win, right? She nodded. Of course, I don't have to explain myself to anyone except Congress, but she swore me to secrecy. It hurt her to leave you much more than she could admit to anyone, but I saw it. She was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing to do, I thought, would be to marry me and live happily for the rest of my life. But this was not the time or place for argument. She continued, this could be a real struggle. Emma's father is using his influence to create problems. Katie and Monica were denied an apartment rental renewal the day before, and they need to move out in a week. Monica's bakery has already survived 4 inspections by various inspectors in a week. I'll stop it, but he won't wait long before he starts influencing her suppliers. A woman in a rainbow skirt and another in a formal suit, Monica and Katie apparently stood transfixed by my words. I decided it was better to explain everything right away. I'm sure you don't trust me. I raised my hand, stopping possible objections. And why shouldn't you? You don't know me at all. Here's what I can offer. I have a farm close to the Green Line. And my house is quite large. It's an old farmhouse with 6 bedrooms, minus the basement. You can stay with me for free until Emma gets better, or you decide to move out. Monica remained silent, but Katie, with a gloomy face, spoke. Hands down. Just so we can keep an eye on Ellie. We promised Emma that we would take care of her, and we don't really have a choice. I couldn't help but smile when I realized that Katie was Emma's partner from the art gallery. She looked at me suspiciously, but I decided not to bring up the topic. Besides, Monica probably didn't know anything, and I didn't need the extra drama right now. I explained where the farm was and gave them the address and phone number. Katie said they would come after they went home to pick up some clothes. The electricity in their apartment mysteriously went out last night, and they couldn't find anyone to turn it on. Monica looked at me with a firm gaze. Don't create illusions for yourself. Forget about any fantasies about us. Walking around the house in our underpants. I have more important things to do right now than your preferences in underwear. I returned to Ellie's room, who sat and waited patiently, gently stroking her mother's face while the nurse nearby nearly fainted from worry. Are we going to live with you now? She asked with genuine curiosity. I couldn't help but smile. Small hairs have long ears. She giggled and smiled widely. I took out my phone and showed her the photo. I think Frankie will need your help. She tilted her head to get a better look at the image. He's so cute. It's a pug, right? This kid is a real naughty boy. He could definitely use a friend. She laughed again. When they reached home, it was already about 9 in the evening. Katie and Monica looked around the house with caution, but Ellie immediately ran inside, squealing with delight, and almost came face to face with Frankie, who was wagging his tail wildly. It was love at first sight. Seconds later, they were happily playing on the floor. Kathy and Monica relaxed a little as I showed them around the house. A huge old manor built just after the Civil War. My grandfather bequeathed it to me because I was passionate about history, and my brothers and sisters received more land. I sold 30 acres to renovate the house and return it to its former stately beauty. I modernized it in some places, but kept the historical spirit. We chose Ellie's room next to mine, and Katie and Monica's room on the other side of hers. The transition to a new life was not easy. Ellie had to get used to wearing jeans and t-shirts instead of dresses, frivolous or otherwise. Katie, and especially Monica, had to learn to trust me. It wasn't easy, and the path to trust wasn't always obvious. I think Monica started to trust me after Ellie got sick with a stomach virus. I spent the whole night with her, changing the sheets, cleaning up the vomit, and calming her down. A few days later, while I was reading late at night in the library after Ellie had gone to bed, first Katie and then Monica walked across the room with a very determined step. They were wearing t-shirts and new Hello Kitty underwear. It was a thoughtful gesture of trust. It was not repeated again, but its meaning was very clear. We established a certain routine. Each evening, either Katie, Monica, or I spent a few hours with Emma listening to the sounds of the machines that kept her alive. On Saturdays, Ellie visited her mother for a few hours. About a month after Ellie moved in with me, the day came for the custody trial. Katie and Monica walked up to the judge while I stayed back with Emma's boss. Finally, I saw Emma's parents. Her father is a perfectly groomed man with perfect hair and a $5,000 suit, and her mother is an aristocratic woman with gray hair wearing a Vera Wang dress. They literally radiated wealth. Argument, and the judge nodded in my direction, signaling me to come forward. Emma's father looked at me in bewilderment. Apparently, his people weren't doing their job. They didn't know why Katie, Monica, and Ellie moved in with me. At the judge's insistence, I submitted DNA tests and explained that Emma had deliberately kept the truth from me to protect my career. But now I was sure that I was Ellie's biological father. Emma's parents' lawyer tried to object, so your work puts the child at risk. I shook my head. No, I don't do undercover operations anymore. There is no threat to security or instability. The deputy director supported my words. I also explained that Katie and Monica were willing to help me care for the baby until Emma recovered. The court's decision was almost inevitable. Emma's father listened to the verdict with eyes devoid of emotion, like a shark. But her mother, on the other hand, was clearly shocked, her blue eyes expressing loss. As soon as the judge left the courtroom, Emma's father slipped out behind him, surrounded by a trail of assistants and lawyers. Emma's mother was left standing in shock with only the driver next to her. I approached her. "You can come to us on Sundays, but this is a farm, so you'll probably need jeans and boots." Call ahead, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, I tried to raise Emma the way I was raised, but her character was different. I realized my mistakes too late. I would like to be a part of my granddaughter's life, even just a little." I gave her driver my address and phone number. The very next Sunday she came, and every Sunday after that. Her name was Evelyn, and she was great. She wore jeans a little too new, boots a little too fancy, and a simple t-shirt. But she came every Sunday, no exceptions. Ellie took her horseback riding on picnics and showed her how to make fires. Evelyn and her husband did not marry for love. They were united to create a dynasty. On their wedding day, the Dow Jones Industrial Average jumped 253 points. But they essentially led separate lives, and unfortunately Emma remained their only child due to her father's health problems, not hers. After he transmitted the disease to her through sex, all attempts to have a second child stopped. Divorce was impossible. The financial losses would be catastrophic. Evelyn had homes in France, Portugal, and New York, but she realized what she had lost with Emma and was determined not to miss out on her relationship with her granddaughter. She added an apartment in Falls Church. Evelyn made it clear to her husband that if he continued to take any legal or illegal action, she would file for divorce regardless of the consequences. This was completely fine with me since my range of options for dealing with his pressure was quickly disappearing into the dark corners of human nature. It took another 3 months before doctors allowed Emma to finally come out of her coma. And when she woke up, we were next to each other. Ellie was sitting on the edge of her bed, and I was in the far corner of the room. Wordlessly, she hugged Ellie and held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. I stood back while she hugged Katie and Monica. I gave them time to talk. Her clear blue eyes finally settled on me, and I saw them widen. Her lips parted slightly in silent apology. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry." Katie and Monica took Ellie out of the room, leaving us alone. "Sorry for what?" "For not telling you that I was pregnant. For not telling you about Ellie. I understand you wanted to protect my career just like Ellie. I can't say it didn't hurt or that I don't regret missing the first 5 years of her life." She didn't know what to say to this, and silence fell between us. She spoke again, this time carefully. "I had dreams about you." I smiled at her and sat on the edge of her bed. "I've been coming here and reading to you 3 times a week for the last few months." I took her hand. Emma smiled a soft, almost shy smile. "I missed you so much. I should have." She hesitated. "I don't know." I don't know how to fix all this. I shook my head. We will have enough time to think everything over. Ellie will be very happy when you come to the farm. Emma looked a little puzzled, and I explained that Katie, Monica, and Ellie had moved into my farm. Her face twisted with anger when Ihop mentioned the problems with their rental, and her jaw literally dropped when I told her that Evelyn had started coming to visit. It didn't take much convincing to convince Emma to come to our farm, given the united front that Katie, Monica, Ellie, and I put up against her. We also had Frankie, who was also willing to help us, which led to an epic dog chase through the hospital corridors and almost cost me a hospital ban. Evelyn's status as a major donor saved me from serious trouble. It took a month of physical therapy before Emma was able to move home with us. It took another 4 months for her to move into my room. Ellie was very supportive of this idea, and we were still us. Whatever chemistry we had, it turned out to be indestructible. The scars and missing leg didn't matter to me, and it made Emma's recovery process easier. She gave up going undercover for Ellie, and has now accepted the fact that she won't be able to work in the field anymore. Emma began doing supervisory work and gradually rose to the position of deputy director. The hardest thing for Emma was accepting Evelyn. It took 4 years and 2 more children before she fully trusted her mother. We ended up with 2 additional houses on our farm, one for Katie and Monica and one for Evelyn. Evelyn no longer wears Vera Wang dresses, but her jeans are now well worn, and she still has a taste for expensive boots. Ellie's first child, our granddaughter, had been born just seconds before I laid eyes on her for the first time. Her name is Alyssa, and she's great. She has the brightest blue topaz eyes I have ever seen. They were cold as ice, almost transparent, the colors of the frozen heart of a glacier. They sparkled with suppressed rage as she attacked. I felt ice crystals cover my heart as her voice cut with the precision of a surgeon. There was not a drop of love or human affection in her voice. She didn't even notice me standing in the dark corridor. Yes, she had never really seen me before. I was almost invisible to her, even in the best moments, and since I was rarely home due to boarding, school, or vacations, really forced visits to network with other descendants of the elite. I wasn't even sure she would have recognized me on the street, although of course she would never have to just walk down the street. Her victim stood calmly, as if the words she hurled at him with contempt had no meaning, despite their weight. He will never touch her again. There will be no other children. There will be no reserve for an heir. Now it was all on me. I was doomed to become Reinhardt. The father blinked a single time, the only movement on his face, carved as if from stone. Okay, she'll do it. It was the only glimpse of emotion I ever saw from my father, almost an outburst of rage by his standards. And that's what was expected of me. I was raised to be the heir to the greatest financial merger ever made. Reinhardt married the brilliant daughter of New York. Reinhardt, it sounded like something from the Middle Ages, and in a sense it was so. The head of the Reinhardt house was never called by name. His name was simply Reinhardt. This tradition continued even as traders became bankers and then venture capitalists. The trading house turned into an empire so huge that no one knew exactly where it began and where it ended. I was trained from birth to lead this huge enterprise. Private schools, tutors, elite boarding schools in Europe. Math, economics, and statistics were drilled into me as soon as I could read. Taekwondo began at the age of 5 to teach me self-discipline, quick thinking, and to prepare me for the less obvious but equally brutal battles of the financial world. From the very beginning, my education and life were designed to make me a corporate lawyer. Financiers and economists could be purchased in the required quantities. Lawyers were a problem like Machiavelli's mercenaries. A bad lawyer could ruin you, and a good one could turn out to be too ambitious. But they were necessary, and so Reinhardt's heir studied law in order to control the lawyers. So my fate was predetermined, from birth, and I hated it. I didn't know what I wanted, but it definitely wasn't this. A life of almost absolute privilege and power, life without meaning. I was raised by servants who were constantly changing. Mother ignored me. At some point I found out what a real mother is. And from then on, I began to call her Evelyn, and not Mom. I almost never saw my father. Was too busy to bother with his only child. I suspected that he really wanted a son. But when he infected Evelyn with the disease from one of his many helpers, that possibility disappeared. She was not interested in his affairs. She had a yoga instructor and a massage therapist. His carelessness turned her indifference into active contempt. I have seen the destructive influence of money at this level. They ruined everything, everyone. Trust was impossible. There was no need to talk about love. So at 13, standing in the teak-paneled hallway, I learned that my dream of perhaps escaping my fate was shattered. Oh, I rebelled over little things. I ended up losing my virginity to a Norwegian ski instructor. And the next morning, I found a pack of pills on my sink. I could no longer find this instructor. Every small rebellion was either cleverly neutralized or ignored. My future loomed like an iceberg. Everything is according to their plan. I did well. I was the future Reinhardt. My early education and discipline produced the expected results. I studied hard, research, logic, law, always best in class, certainly, but I continued to fight. Secretly, I was looking for a way to escape. I almost broke down in law school. I met a guy. He was funny, smart, witty, and knew how to push all my buttons. I confided in him, told him about my disgust for the life into which I was being led. He listened and seemed to understand me completely. He wondered if I could turn this life into something I would love no matter what. He sounded so reasonable and smart, and then it turned out that he worked for Reinhardt. I never knew whether he was sent to me or just recruited when we started dating. Then I realized that I could no longer trust anyone. Anyone could work for them, and even if they started out with the best intentions, sooner or later money would eat away at their souls just like everyone else. So I continued to hone my skills and strive to be the best. I turned out to be the best at pretend to give up. I played by the rules, continuing to look for a way to salvation where their money had no power. When I graduated from law school, I told them that I needed to take the bar exam in New York, where the world of finances, and then it would take several months, maybe a year and a half, to prepare for the position they had reserved for me. As expected, I passed the exam for the first time. They were in no hurry and did not suspect anything. I moved into an apartment and started training to live without money. And then I realized that I didn't know anything about living independently. Half the clothes were ruined while I was learning to do laundry. What about cooking? I lost 5 kilograms in the first month. And in that first month, I decided that I needed to occupy my days with something while I was looking for my way out. A flyer in the lobby caught my eye. Nursing courses. And as with everything else, I turned out to be damn good at it. It was a great way to learn about normal people and learn to be normal. I liked this most of all. I was completing my last internships, many internships in different hospitals when I found my way out. A shootout in the city center claimed 2 lives and 3 were wounded. Most of them are gang members. But one of the wounded was an FBI special agent. He was brought to our hospital. Reinterpreting Hans Gruber, I was looking for a miracle and found the FBI, a nearly incorruptible FBI. I applied immediately and waited patiently for it to be processed. I didn't seriously think that they might not take me. I've never failed, and I studied tirelessly for physical tests, taking lessons at shooting ranges with every type of firearm possible. One of the instructors I hired with Reinhardt's money was a retired FBI officer. The other was a former Delta Force fighter. By the time classes at the academy began, I was as prepared as possible. The rest of the students were typical hard workers, full of ambition and determination. Best in their classes, football and volleyball stars, cheerleaders, and several guys from the chess club. But they were not thoroughbred horses, and at first our relationship did not work out. I honestly tried to fit in to become one of the team. Everything went wrong on the 3rd day. I don't know what I did or said wrong, but someone sniffed out something. I heard whispers of rich bitch and found myself isolated. Maybe they thought I would get bored and leave. To hell with them, they had no idea what loneliness was. I grew up much more alone than they could have imagined. This isolation lasted for weeks. Their attitude changed after the first match in our 4th week. The instructor watched us carefully. He recognized my style and my abilities. I'm 5'3" by stretch. So when we were paired up, he put me against the biggest and strongest guy in the class. And he winked at me. This fight lasted 23 seconds. My second fight is almost a minute long. The next day, my nickname changed from Rich Bitch to Dangerous Mouse, and they began to treat me with respect. They accepted me, although they didn't love me. It was the warmest feeling I've ever experienced. 6 weeks as part of a team. At graduation, I realized that my deception had failed. A hand-carved rosewood box was delivered to my room. Inside was a bottle of 1928 Krug champagne. It could only be Evelyn, for the sake of appearances, of course. Reinhardt had never given a gift in his life. I returned home to face them before taking my place in California. This meeting was unpleasant. Reinhardt was silently furious. Evelyn was coldly furious, and I had a 20,000 hangover and an empty bottle in my luggage. Suffice it to say that by the end of the 15-minute conversation, I was disinherited. I silently left the office, collected my unpacked luggage, and left. Whatever fantasies I had about being a special agent quickly evaporated. At first, it was endless rounds of paperwork and meetings, but it seemed more real. I was good at paperwork, planning, and gathering details. It was several months before I was assigned to any real operations other than the usual small cases that are left to junior agents. And this was entirely due to blind luck and my terrible culinary skills. I was given a message that one of the defendants in my case was being taken away. They indicated the time and address, and I went there. The funny thing about case numbers is that you get one number wrong and everything goes wrong. The wrong agents are sent to the wrong places. So when I arrived and saw the HRT hostage rescue team van sitting quietly on the edge of an area that was clearly no match for the harmless crook I'd been gathering material against. I put on my apologetic junior agent mask and went to tell them the bad news. They sent the wrong agent. There was a tense atmosphere inside the van as stern, armored agents studied the building's layouts and animatedly discussed plans, backup plans, and plans for backup plans. The whole scene reminded me of wolves preparing to hunt. I spent many evenings watching the Discovery Channel. I looked around trying to find at least someone familiar. No one. I stood quietly, waiting for someone to ask what I was doing here, and then I would tell them about my mistake. Finally, the bald man who seemed to be the center of all this activity suddenly turned his attention to me. "Who the hell are you?" I tried to explain, but he interrupted me with irritated fury. "Holy Jesus, save me. Does your mommy know you're here? And does she know that you have to cross the road to get here?" A wave of merriment swept through the room, but I noticed one elderly agent with a steel gray haircut who was lazily sitting on the table with a map and looking at me, clearly expecting me to pay. The Reinhardt in me rose up. "Yeah, asshole. She sent me to drag you back to the nursing home to give you an enema." The bald man turned red with anger, but before he could say anything, the gray-haired man spoke. "Dave, wait." Dave turned to him. "Mike." The gray-haired man looked at me. "Turn around." Something in his voice convinced me to do it without asking questions. "How much do you weigh?" 52 kilograms. Maybe on a good day your clothes are loose. I'd say you're about 48 now. This was probably true. My cooking skills haven't improved much. I ate a lot of salads, mostly because I either undercooked them or burned everything else. I nodded. He examined me carefully. "She will walk through the window with such a skinny butt. We could try the dream option." Whatever it meant, Dave was dubious. "She's not from HRT. If anything goes wrong, we'll be under attack from the director." Mike smiled. A grim smile. "Nothing will go wrong. This is Danger Mouse. Jorge told me about it at the academy, economical size, full-ass package for pleasure." He turned to me, "Isn't it?" I straightened up. Whatever it was, I wasn't going to miss it. It's me. Nobody wanted to argue with Mike. Soon I was squeezing through the small hole and down into the pitch-dark basement with a tiny flashlight and a compact .45 caliber pistol, which Mike insisted I replace with a standard .4 Zocaliber Bureau. Mike was confident that standard Bureau weapons were not powerful enough to guarantee a first-shot kill. So armed, I began to look around the darkness. It smelled of mold, damp stones, and dust. Even with a flashlight, the darkness pressed in like a black velvet blanket. I completed the task, but now I was the favorite daughter. A month later, after the mandatory post-shooting cool-down, I was selected for special training for secret missions. I've never seen training like this. Terribly realistic. eerily effective. The pressure was unrelenting, and the exhaustion was so complete that I did not dream at all. Every week we were given psychological exams. I was raised like Reinhardt, and no one was mentally stronger than me. But even for me, it was a seemingly endless series of trials. Sleepless nights in any weather and on any terrain, constant interrogations round after round of combat training. None of this even remotely resembles the usual step-by-step safety first aid standard training. I enjoyed it with my teeth bared, even if sometimes they were bloody. The last test was devastating. They took my biggest fear from my assessment and included it in the script, Synchronicity of Fears Captured by Psychic Assessments, and these fears were used against me. When the script began, I was knocked off my feet by an overwhelming force. My opponent was chosen for his enormous strength and given detailed instructions on how to make me feel helpless. How to be disruptive. It was terrible, but I had an ace up my sleeve. The breakup was an old, fading fear. My nightmares were dominated by cold blue eyes. At least I could fight the breakup, and I did it. My opponent had the chest of a boxer, the abs of a wrestler, and the pain threshold of a battle tank. He took my best shots and still hit my ass. I'm done. I couldn't really fight because of that hip injury, and he knew it. I saw in his eyes a respect that was bought at a price, but he began to inexorably lean towards my weak side. But that wasn't my biggest concern. I already saw something in those eyes when he pressed me. Against all logic, we got in touch, realizing that we were participants in a crazy scenario, that it was all a game. And for a split second, I felt more real human warmth than I had felt in my entire life. This precious moment cost him a groin injury and broken ribs, but it cost me more. Our relationship scared me more than the fear that this scenario could actually allow real violence. I could still fight it. I might have lost, but I could and would fight to the end. But this connection also seemed something that needed to be fought. All my adult life, I have kept men and women at arm's length. Who knew who my tireless parents might send? Professionals are convincing, impeccable, people who can make anyone's heartbeat faster, or they would just buy anyone I talk to. Their money could buy a lot. Regardless, I wasn't sure that Father and Evelyn had refused to make me a Reinhardt. At the end of the script, when he carried me to the infirmary, the magnetism was overwhelming. I found myself starting to press myself against him, and managed to turn it into a craning of my neck. He gave me his shirt in a chivalrous gesture, so that my hand rested on the bare skin and muscle of his shoulders. We joked a bit while we waited for the doctor. The connection only became stronger. There was some undeniable chemistry, something more than just lust. If there had been a door in the room, I would have seriously broken the rules. A few more minutes and I would have stopped caring about the door. The doctor arrived just in time. After I picked up my crutches and set off, I looked back and saw him watching me. Part of me wanted to go back and give him my real name. Part of me wanted to run as fast and as far as possible. I kept his shirt and slept in it. I haven't even washed it for a month. It had to be disgusting, but that's not true. He was far away, far enough that I could indulge in a tiny fantasy or two about a normal life. The dots of our blood mixed on the shirt were a symbol of something that could have been. Maybe in another world. I ended up washing the shirt on the hot water setting to fix the blood. I learned this the hard way. It would be another 2 years before I saw him again. Over these 2 years, I have proven myself again and again. I wanted to be the best agent ever born. I had the upbringing, ability, and ambition to make it happen. And keeping track of these things has helped keep my own demons at bay. These dreams of porcelain blue eyes became smaller and smaller, but never disappeared, and always stirred me up as a hard, cold hand squeezed my heart. I worked a lot, and I had support. I knew Mike gave me the nod, and it carried a lot of weight. As a result, I was sent to headquarters. I worked mostly with organized crime. It's not as sexy as terrorism, but because of the illegal substances, the work is never ending. But these were not all prohibited substances. I spent 6 weeks working as a waitress in a San Angelo bar when I helped take down one of the largest cattle rustling rings in history. To do this, we collaborated with the Texas Rangers. This is a great organization, but the rustle of cattle Texas Rangers? Well, yes, hi, some smart guy pinned a thrift store cowboy hat to my office wall, but I have the real thing at home, along with a pair of sparkly boots, jeans, a western shirt, and a bandana. I kept my waitress uniform. I was almost killed in a shootout in Canada over the cheese and maple syrup. It's a thing there. Believe it or not, cheese is heavily taxed in Canada, so criminal gangs smuggle cheese north and unlicensed syrup south across the U.S. border. 4 weeks of freezing my ass, wearing flannel shirts and sleeping in a shitty room above a Canadian pizzeria. Things went wrong just before we served the warrant and ended in a real shootout. When I ran next to a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant in a cheese warehouse, these are people who take their mozzarella very seriously. As for my personal life, I simply didn't have one. I immersed myself in my work. I had no life outside. I couldn't trust anyone not to be corrupted by Reinhardt's money. The closest I came to a relationship was a few drunk makeouts with another agent. Cat short for Catherine while we were working undercover. As a gay art dealer couple, I didn't take it seriously at all. An all-girls prep school almost guarantees the experience of a relationship like this, but for Cat, it was life-changing. She never thought that her constant problems in relationships were caused by the fact that she was actually gay. She left the agency and got a permanent girlfriend, Monica, who owns the bakery, for the production of cupcakes seriously, and wears too much tie-dye. In fact, any tie-dye is too much, but she wears it in such quantities that it is even impressive. However, they seem more than happy together. Monica tried to distance herself from me when she learned about Kat's past with me, but she eventually realized that I wasn't a threat. I didn't get into a relationship. I didn't even have real friends other than Kat and Monica, and I kept them at a distance. However, the work was going great. I had a talent for planning and execution thanks to my upbringing, and this was recognized by most of the people I worked with. Moreover, I was a fanatic, tirelessly driven. I didn't notice this until one day I ran into Mike in the office hallway. Dangerous Mouse nowadays, only members of the HRT team use this nickname, and there was a modicum of respect in it. I smiled slightly. Mike, I hear you are doing a great job. I knew you would be good. I knew that you were one of us. He stopped and looked serious. Continue, Mouse. Someone has to kill the monsters. One of us, one from us. These words hit like a hammer. Mike was more than just an agent. He was the head of the HRT group, a paladin, a knight in shining armor, a true believer in every sense of the word. And that's what he meant. And I realized that he was right. I stopped doing work for my own sake or for the sake of the work itself. My ambitions were still unquenchable, but now there was something more. I really started to believe. For the first time in my life, I was following a dream of a better world. And so life continued at full speed, until one day when I was working out at the gym, an elderly woman with gray hair stood on the treadmill next to me. I didn't really look at her, probably someone's secretary, in her manner. However, she ran well. I heard you're a star here, maybe the next Hawthorne. That's what they say. Maria Hawthorne was the executive assistant to the director. There were legends about her. She was believed to be the toughest woman on the planet. It was rumored that even congressmen did not contact her, and it wasn't just politics early in her career. She ruthlessly exposed cockarchles and human traffickers. I don't know if it's true, but rumors claim that she personally killed 8 people. I shrugged. Maybe, but what if it means I'm stuck in the office? This is not for me. We exchanged a few more routine pleasantries, and by the end of the day, I had forgotten about this conversation. I was right. She really was someone's secretary. Secretary to Maria Hawthorne. A week later, when I walked into the assistant director's office, I knew it was a trap as soon as I saw that woman. She just smiled and nodded, showing me the door. I was called without ceremony, just through a yellow note that landed on my desk. Tall, thin, with dark brown hair pulled back into an almost severe updo, Hawthorne was standing to the side of her desk when I entered. She extended her hand to me. It's nice to meet someone who is said to be the next me. I prepared to gently excuse myself, but she interrupted me with a smile. Let's go for a walk, Emma. She led me away from the building. A minute or two later, we were on the street, heading towards the Smithsonian Institution. We walked in silence until we were far away. Mike recommended you. For what? There's one problem. I sometimes discuss problems with him. He does a good job of helping me put things into perspective. I sensed that her relationship with Mike was more than just a work relationship. I checked her information when I received the call and found out that she was single. And Mike was a confirmed bachelor. I ignored it. She continued, "We have a case. The team behind it presented the plan this morning. This is an ideal plan from the Bureau's point of view, and on paper it looks great, and I hate him. The Romanian network we monitor has avoided such pitfalls too often. It's a different part of the network, but we've failed too many times with these guys for it to be a coincidence. These are very bad people who are transporting very dangerous weapons, and if we don't capture them, a lot of innocent people will die. So what is my role? I want to use people outside the Bureau. These guys may have connections with Russian intelligence services or simply understand us too well and predict our actions, or she fell silent, or we have a leak. There's a lot of money involved in this game. Even the FBI isn't perfect." There was silence as I processed her words. She stated the obvious. "You cannot be bought. I know about your parents. You can walk out the door at any time and have more money than all of us combined. I'm sure they will take you back." It all came down to money again. But she continued, "That alone is not enough. Mike says you are the agent who will do whatever it takes, that you are ready for anything. You have worked with many external agencies and they have spoken well of you. Not everyone knows how to collaborate with others. We stopped at one of the many street food stalls surrounding the Smithsonian Museum. She ordered a couple of gyros. I told the seller that I wanted them to be cooked before my eyes." Maria raised an eyebrow. "I worked for DAC Gyro Cards in New York for 3 weeks. During observation, they have pre-made gyros behind the counter that are made ahead of time. They can be prepared several hours ago, maybe even a day or two. We found a bench and sat down to eat. I am removing the Bureau team from this case. I will say that the General Counsel recommended attacking the other end of the network. The only people from the Bureau who will be in the know will be you and me, Mike and my assistant. I asked the director to lend us one Army group. This is Operation Cumulin Green. I didn't know what it was and told her about it. She shook her head, and she shouldn't know. They do not work for domestic purposes in the U.S., law of insurrection, but I can get them as technical resources to fight terrorism. But these are not ordinary soldiers. They work undercover around the world, mainly in the field of counterterrorism. These are the best of the best. They have to be like that because where they work, they essentially become the bad guys. We're always just one call away from help. If help comes to where they are working, this is already a very bad moment. They are incredibly capable, but they are not police, federal or otherwise. The last time we used one of them, the operation went wrong, and a Cumulin agent took the gun of one of our special agents and killed 3 drug dealers without even trying to arrest them. The General Counsel was furious. They weren't too happy to be working with us again, and I had to ask the director to push it. Great, sounds promising. There's a good chance they'll despise me. So are you in? Refusal of such an offer would mean the end of his career. I finished my gyros and looked around. I'm in. Cumulin Green was a small brick warehouse converted into an office on the outskirts of Bay, Georgetown, with underground parking. The sign said Calliope Limited, and it looked harmless enough. But the valet was the human equivalent of a Doberman, the epitome of alertness and restrained aggression. So were the 4 guards inside whom we passed. The secretary checked our IDs, called to make sure we were expected, and then let us in. One of the guards escorted us inside. I didn't know what to expect, but it looked like a standard office, no different from mine. Except it was a little more shabby. The people there were different. If the FBI was full of jocks and cheerleaders, then this place was a haven for those who smoked at the far end of the school parking lot. They were dressed decently enough, standard suits from Washington stores, a little more personal than you'd expect from the Bureau. But what really stood out was the intense weariness with which they watched us, even if they didn't do it explicitly. They didn't seem to particularly like law enforcement officers of any kind. We were shown into an office with a conference table, where we were greeted by a stern woman in a formal suit. After Maria introduced us all, the woman simply replied, "You can call me Donna." Maria seemed to have expected this and explained what we needed, and also, to my surprise, shared her suspicions about a possible leak of information somewhere in the Ministry of Justice. Donna motioned for her secretary to call Eric, who turned out to be a short, stocky guy. He invited me to come with him to see the technical support that would be provided to me. 3 floors below in the basement, I found myself at Christmas. We walked past the gym, the shooting range, and into a room that looked like it had been hit by a run-amok Radio Shack. We had to step over wires, boxes, half-assembled computers to get to the Gawk shelves at the end. All the most modern surveillance equipment was collected there, the existence of which I did not even suspect. Most of these things were not supposed to be used on a soil. Never. I practically skipped back up the stairs, and she found herself in the middle of a clearly tense moment. I saw a familiar face. A wave of feelings washed over me like a school crush. Suddenly, the module of witty remarks turned on in me, and I started making sarcastic jokes. He immediately picked them up with a knowing smile. Donna seemed quite pleased with this chatter. Maria looked thoughtful, and her assistant looked completely confused. I decided to clarify the situation and explained where we met, although I left out a few details, and of course, I didn't mention that my heart was pounding as if it was going to jump out of my chest. The rational, logical part of my brain was screaming run at the top of my lungs, but the rest of me had a completely different idea. When he agreed to work with me, and as it turned out this was in doubt, I felt both relieved and afraid. I asked Maria's assistant to bring me a folder with my notes, sat down at the end of the table, and we began to discuss plans. When I looked up again, Donna, and her assistant had already disappeared into the other room. We acted very professionally, discussing infiltration plans, prioritization, and goals. He was thrilled that I had an emergency evacuation plan that could actually work. The hardest part would be the initial setup, and he was working on a list of people to do it. This may sound a little crazy, but legally, it will be the only transferred asset. His people could deliver the equipment, install it, but they had no right to turn it on or test it. However, they could stand next to an FBI agent and tell him in real time how to do it. So I'll have to ask Maria to add 2 agents for this job. He was professional, respectful, and incredibly distracting. It turned out that he was a sure-on vacation when he was called, and he had no time to do anything other than spray himself with a little cologne along the way. So he smelled like cologne, and that special smell of hot skin you get after the beach. And he had this most annoying habit of looking me straight in the eyes. Like I said, he distracted me. By the time we finished, we had managed to tell each other very little about ourselves, although I did manage to mention that I was not in a relationship. And I found out that he didn't have them either. It didn't help my internal dialogue at all. The day we moved to the Romanian Quarter was a real discovery. The Cumulant Green team was as convincing as they could be. One couple stumbled out of the car arguing loudly and forcefully about his behavior at last weekend's party. He was drunk and behaved disgustingly. This was clearly a long and bitter dispute that had dragged on for several days. And it was all complete nonsense. They were not assigned to a pair until 3 days ago. Furniture for the newlyweds was delivered without any problems with the typical jokes that accompany newlyweds. And when my guy went to get pizza, he came back with pizza and beer for everyone and flowers from the pharmacy for me. It doesn't seem like much, and yes, it's part of the cover, but this was the first time in my life that someone gave me flowers, and this was probably visible on my face. One of the car foreign intelligence operatives took one look at me and whispered, "Ooh, looks like someone is going to get something today." Oh, yes. Her eyes sparkled in the dim light as she mockingly teased me, implying that something intimate might happen between me and him. The words sounded mocking, but for some reason they struck a nerve, although it was all part of a cover-up. He looked at me, smiled slightly, and handed me the flowers. I couldn't say anything. For the first time in my life, someone gave me something just like that, without a goal or selfish motive. It was a strange, almost shocking feeling. The next few days passed quietly. We set up equipment and tracked the target, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. He was polite, professional, but the way he looked at me haunted me. It seemed like he could see right through me, and I wasn't used to someone studying me so carefully. That evening, he and I returned to our apartment after work, and I still couldn't get rid of thoughts about him. He went into the shower, and I settled down on the couch with a book, trying to distract myself. But when he came out, the smell of fresh cologne mixed with his natural scent threw me off again. We started chatting, and the conversation somehow smoothly moved into a more personal direction. He told stories from his life. I shared mine. I noticed that I was becoming more open with him than with anyone in a long time. And at some point, everything changed. I couldn't resist the attraction I felt. It felt like all the barriers I had built over the years were crumbling. He was nearby, and our jokes turned into something more intimate. We both knew there was more to it than just physical attraction. That night, I gave in to my feelings. We were no longer just colleagues on a mission. There was something much more between us. I tried to convince myself that this was just part of the cover, that it was just another way to be convincing in the role. But that was a lie. For the first time in my life, I felt something that could be called real affection. However, I understood that this would not last long. As soon as the mission is over, I will have to leave. We both knew our lives were too complicated to be together. I pretended that everything was normal, that this was just a temporary hobby, but inside I was torn apart by contradictions. And then things got even worse. I missed Women's Days. I tried to reassure myself that it was just stress from the mission, but my intuition told me otherwise. A few days later, I bought a pregnancy test and took it in the bathroom of our fake home. Plus, positive test. The world around me collapsed. I, brought up in the logic and cold calculation of Reinhardt, simply decided that this needed to be eliminated. Remove this random set of cells, it would seem that this should have been simple. Yes, it was meant to be. I told myself it would be easy. Just a small medical procedure, nothing complicated. But in reality, it was not easy. No way, I never planned to have children. I never thought about it seriously. My life was full of secrets, and how could I fit a child into this chaos? It seemed impossible. But I couldn't stop thinking about him. About how he played with the kids in the neighborhood while we were on a mission, how his face lit up when he laughed with them. And then the nightmare came. The same one that haunted me before, but with renewed vigor. I saw the same cold blue porcelain eyes in front of Hack, only now they were looking straight at me and uttering words that I could not forget. "Mom, please." I woke up in a cold sweat, barely able to stop myself from screaming. He was sleeping next to me, and I quietly slipped out of bed so as not to wake him. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat there trying to convince myself that I was doing everything right. She told herself that this was just a collection of cells, that this was not a real child. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more those icy blue eyes loomed before my eyes. I looked in the mirror, and a woman looked back at me with the coldest blue eyes I had ever seen. They belonged to me. The operation is completed. It didn't make headlines, but those who cared knew the mission was a success. This operation was supposed to secure my place in the elite. I stood in Maria's office, already clearly pregnant. I avoided her for 2 months after the initial interrogation, then took 3 months of accrued leave, citing the need to recover from the mission, and now I stood there, waiting for her to judge me for my personal failure. She tilted her head to the side. "Did you tell him?" And everything came out at once. My fears, nightmares, everything that had accumulated. She just silently led me to the couch and let me cry on her shoulder. In the end, although she didn't agree with my decision not to tell him, she supported me. She said I was too valuable to lose. I was transferred from secret assignments to work planning, counterterrorism operations. This was a significant increase. Kat and Monica have been a real lifesaver for me. They helped me and even attended the birth. Although it seems that all 3 of us forgot about the breathing exercises. They handed me Ellie. She had the brightest blue eyes I've ever seen. Almost unreal. They radiate warmth and love. Working in counterterrorism planning meant I now spent more time at home. And when I was away, Kat and Day. Monica always helped me with Ellie. I thought about calling him almost every day. But the fear of them was too great. I was afraid that they would destroy it, as they would destroy everything they touched. I loved him too much to let that happen. The dreams of cold porcelain eyes never returned, but several nights a week I snuck into Ellie's room to check on her, to hug her, to make sure she's not sitting in the corner, curled up under the covers. Years passed. Ellie grew up. I don't remember anything about Istanbul. I was there for 3 weeks and 2 days. I remember getting on the plane thinking that when I got back, I would need to issue a new power of attorney for Kat and Monica. And then I remember waking up in the hospital. I saw everyone, especially him. He wasn't mad at me. He was sad about missing time with Ellie. But people from our world tend to be extremely pragmatic, so he understood at least the version of the reason that I voiced to him. It took years before I was able to tell him the whole truth. I already knew that I had lost my leg when I came to my senses. But when I heard about Evelyn, I almost screamed in horror. But when she came to me, she was different. In jeans, her icy arrogance completely disappeared, and she had the saddest blue eyes I've ever seen. Almost transparent, the color of endless tears. I've never heard her apologize before. Never. For anything, but now she was asking for forgiveness. Not for herself. She didn't think she deserved it, but for the chance to participate in Ellie's life. For a chance, even a small one, at redemption. I set strict conditions and watched her like a hawk. She had already warned Reinhardt, threatening to destroy his world if he tried to get close to me. Again, she was still a little cunning. He thinks that the sword hanging over the fireplace that she gave him for his birthday is a replica of Napoleon's sword from the Battle of Lodi. This is not a replica, but only Evelyn and I know about this. So many years have passed. Yesterday, I held my granddaughter in my arms for the first time. Her name is Eliza. She's wonderful, and she has the brightest blue eyes I've ever seen. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story. Because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.